Hello everyone and welcome to Java Curriculum Day 5. My name is Joanne Lin and I'm serving as the founder and CEO of MySTEM project. So today we'll be learning a plethora of things, but first we'll start off with the switch statements. So switch statements are used for basically longer if-else statements so that you're not writing as many if, else, else statements, but instead using switch, which helps clean up the code and make it more organized. So let's go into a demo of how to use switch statements. So to start off, let's make an integer and let's call it myInt. So int myInt is equal to, and let's make it equal to 4 for now. So if we were going to make an if statement, I would be saying if myInt is equal to 1, then I do this. And then I do my else if myInt is equal to 2, and then doing that, and then do another else for 3, and then 4, and so on. So as you can see, that just makes the process really complicated and has so many brackets that it's hard to keep track of what is where. So now instead of doing the if-else statements, we can switch to a switch statement. So we'll start off by saying switch, and then we can put myInt in here. Now I'll do my brackets and then press enter. So now I'll make my case. So I'll say if myInt, so case 1 is if myInt is equal to 1. Then I'll do a colon and then enter. Now I'll enter my code block, so I'll say system.out.print 1. And then we have to do break. So this will get out of the if-else statement or the switch statement. So now we'll move on to case 2. So this is if myInt is equal to 2, then I'll do the system.out.print is 2. And then now we'll do break again. And we'll continue to do this until it hits, let's say, 5 cases. Alright, so now I have made the whole switch statement. So since myInt is equal to 4, I would expect this to print out 4 into the terminal. So let's see if that is right. And this program works just as we expected and wanted because it prints out 4. So if you change myInt to be anywhere from 1 to 5, it'll print out the corresponding number into the terminal. Now going back to functions, we have 2 more things to talk about. So first is parameters, which are basically variables that are used specifically in a method, and that can't be used outside of a method. And return statements we've already touched on yesterday, but this is just a little reminder of what these are. So once we get to Visual Studio Code, I'm going to make a function and I'll say static. So remember, the return statement variable is decided by what we add in this next word. So you could say void, which means your function isn't going to return anything. You can return an int, string, boolean, any variable that you can think of. So now I'm going to say that I want to return an integer. Now name this my method and then do my brackets. So in my function, I'll say system.out.print your method has ran, and then I'll return 2. So now when we go here, we can call onto my method and then see that the return variable is an integer with the return keyword here. So if I say int my example is equal to 0, and then my example plus sign equal to my method. So you might be unfamiliar with what this plus and equal means, but this is basically equal to my example is equal to my example plus my method. So it basically just shortens out so that you don't have to add another my example, and instead you can just put the plus here. So next we'll say system.out.print my example. And let's see if it works. So it should be printing out your method has ran and also 2 into the terminal. So as you can see, it's correct as it says your method has ran and also prints out the 2 later on. So now we'll move on to parameters. So what are parameters? Parameters are basically any variable you want inside your program, inside your function, and specifically for your function. So let's say I want to take in an integer variable, so I'll do int, and then I'll name this random number. So when I have initiated a variable at the top, or my parameter, I can use this parameter as an argument inside of my function. So now I'll say return 2 plus random num. So this means that when I return something, I'll return this number that has already been given to me and then add 2 onto that. So we'll continue to keep our my example, and then say, and when I call my method, I'm going to input 5 in here. So this means that my random num for this function will be equal to 5 for now. So when I return it, it should be equal to 7. So now let's run it and see if it works. And as you can see, it says your method has ran and it returns 7. So now if I change this to, let's say, 10, then 10 will be my random num for this function and it'll return 12. And as you can see, it says 12 here. So that is just a quick example of how parameters work. So now we'll move on to lists. So in Java, there's 2 different lists that can be used. There's arrays and array lists. So in both of these, there's array indexes that start at 0 and then count to however long the length of the array is, subtracted by 1. So in the example, you can say there's Volvo, BMW, Ford, or Mazda. So Volvo will start at 0, and BMW will be 1, Ford will be 2, and Mazda will be 3. So yes, there are 4 different indexes in this array, but we count it as 0, 1, 2, 3. So it always starts at 0. Now, arrays and array lists are different, as this is an array and this is an array list. So arrays cannot be adjustable in length. So once you initiate an array, it stays that length. So let's say you want to do an array that can hold 4 variables. Then that is how it'll stay for the rest of the time in your program. So let's get to an example of what arrays look like. So as we go back to our code, let's initiate an array. So let's say I want to make a string array, and I'll do string and then my brackets, and then I'll name it my array, and then I can say my array is equal to my STEM project. So this means that my array will have 3 indexes inside of it. And in addition to that, I'll create an integer array, and I'll name this new array. So let's say you don't even want to add in any data variables into your array, but you just want to say how long you want the array to be. So you can say integer brackets new array is equal to new int, and then let's say I want it to be 4 variables long. So that'll be like that. So now while we're here, we can also do system.out.print. And let's say you want to call a specific index in your array. And let's say I want to do STEM. So I'll write my array, brackets, and since STEM is 0, 1, the first index of this array, I'll put down 1 here, and I'll print out STEM into the console. So we can also do .length, which will find the array length. So I want to say system.out.print new array.length. And once I do this, it should be printing out 4 into the console because my new array has a length of 4 variables. So once I press run, as you can see, it prints out STEM and also 4, which is exactly what we wanted. So now we'll move on to array lists. So array lists are different than arrays in the sense that they can be adjustable in length. So you can add on variables or you can take out variables in your array. But in order to use an array list, you also need to import a library into your code. So arrays and array lists have different functions that you use to get or remove or get the length of a object. So as you can see, there's add, get, remove, set, size, and arrays lists, and there's also more, but these are just really different compared to arrays. So let's get into a demo of how array lists work. So as we go to our code, we'll import at the top the array list library that we need. So we'll do java.util.arraylist and then do our semicolon. So this allows us to use array lists in our code. So now we can start off by initiating our first array list. So now we can initiate an array list. So the first thing that we'll do is type in array list. and then we'll do this sign, and then let's say we want to make a string array list, so we'll do string, and then we'll close it off, and then I'll name it my array, and then I'll set it equal to new array list, and then string. And then I have to do my parentheses and then semicolon. So this is the exact format on how you make an array list. There's really no other way that you can change it up or really anything, but if you want to make an array list, this is what you'll have to type. And make sure that when you're typing array list, you capitalize the L, because otherwise it will give you an error if you don't capitalize the L. So now that we've created my array list, this array list is blank currently. So I can add stuff into it. So I'll do my array dot add, and then I'll add hi, semicolon. And then now, since I want to get this now, so I'll do system.out.print my array dot get. And then my index will be 0 because I only have one thing in this array, and it'll be at index 0. So once I press run, you'll be able to see that it says hi because I said to print out hi right here. So another function that we could do is to print out the array list size. So let's say I want to do my array.size. And just like that, if we run it, then you can see that it prints out hi and then 1, which is the size of our array list. So that's just an example of some functions that array lists can use. And of course, there's more functions that you can use, but those can be searched up on the internet, and they're easy to understand how to use, since array lists and arrays are basically kind of the same thing. The only difference is one is adjustable in length and the other is not. So now we'll move on to parsing through a list using a for loop. So this means going through every single item in the array list or array through a loop and getting the information out and doing something with it. So I'll go through an example of how to do this. So I'll do this example with an array first, and the first thing I'll do is, of course, initiate an array. So let's say I want to make an integer array, and I'll do int my array is equal to, and we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way until 10. All right, so I've initiated my array, and now I'm going to create a for loop to parse through it. So I'll do for int I is equal to 0. I is smaller than my array dot length. So this means that once I reaches my array dot length, which is 10, then it'll stop. So that means it'll run through the whole array before it stops. And I'll do I++. And then do my brackets and then press enter. Now in my for loop, I'll say system.out.print, and then I'll say I want to print out my array and then put my index as I. So I starts at 0, so that means the first index that will be printed out is 1, and then it'll go on until it hits 10, and then the for loop will stop. So let's press run and see if it works. So as you can see, it prints out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is everything that we wanted, and it runs the for loop exactly the way that we wanted. So that's just an example of how you parse through an array using a for loop. Now the last thing that we're going to learn is 2D arrays. So these 2D arrays can only be made using arrays, not array lists. And this is basically an array inside of an array. So if you want to make a table, then this is awesome for making rows and columns. So let's go into an example of how to initiate a 2D array. So let's say we want to make an integer 2D array. So I'll do int and then 2 brackets instead of just 1. And then I'll name this my array is equal to, and then let's say I want to make it 1, 2. So I don't know if you can tell, but in these brackets, there's 2 more sets of brackets inside of the blue brackets, which are yellow. So this is basically the first index in the first array. And then these are the 3 indexes in the second array. And of course, this is a second index in the first array. So it is a little bit confusing, but it's easy to tell when it's written out like this because you can see this is the first index, this is the second index, and if we were to make a third index, then they would be in another pair of these brackets. Okay, so let's say you're wondering, well, I don't want to set in all of my values at once. I just want to make a blank 2D array and then set in my values later. And this is how you would do that. So you would initiate your variable first, and then you set it equal to new int, and let's say you want to make it a 2x3, so that's just a 2x3. And now you have a 2D array named another array that is blank for you to fill in the values into. Now, if you want to add something into your 2D array, then let's say you want to do another array, and you can do index 0, and then 1 is equal to 5. So that just sets one index out of your 2D array, which is basically a table, as 5. So you can keep track of your values inside of your table or indexes through this format of a 2D array. Now, 2D arrays may be confusing to you at first, but once you guys get used to using 2D arrays in your programs, it'll get easier to understand. So that is the end of the day 5 lesson. Don't forget to check Google Classroom and complete the assignment for today. Hope you all have fun coding.